The morning line at Gateway Federal always looked the same from behind Emma Carter's window. Wool coats, impatient shoes, the smell of damp newspapers and old cologne dragged in from the street. The lobby was narrow, fluorescent bright, and designed for people who wanted their money handled quickly and their lives left alone. Outside, St. Louis had already turned gray. Inside, the bank tried to pretend weather didn't exist. Emma had learned to read crowds the way other people read faces. Not because she was special, because the job demanded it. You knew who would slam a pen down before they did it. You knew who would ask for a roll of quarters every Friday. You knew who would apologize too much, and who would never apologize at all. After a while, normal stopped being a vibe and became a pattern. That was why she noticed him immediately. He didn't step into the line the way everyone else did. He entered through the glass doors, paused just long enough to take in the room, and then drifted, not toward the end of the queue, but toward a spot that wasn't a spot. A dead space between the rope stanchions and the brochure rack, close enough to look like he was waiting, far enough to avoid being counted as part of the waiting. Emma's first thought was simple. Maybe he was lost. Maybe he was waiting for someone. Then he shifted one small step to his left, and the move snapped into place like a key turning in a lock. From that new position, he could see both teller windows without turning his head. He could see the front doors in the reflection of the framed FDIC insured notice by the manager's desk. And he could see the little hallway that led to the offices in back, where the loan officers sometimes walked out carrying folders. They pretended no one noticed. He wasn't waiting for his turn. He was placing himself. Emma kept her hands moving, the way you did when the line was out the door. She counted bills, stamped deposit slips, slid receipts across the counter with a practiced smile. But her attention kept snagging on him the way a thread catches on a nail. He was early 30s, maybe 40 at most, clean-shaven, hair neatly combed, no hat. His suit didn't scream money. It screamed effort, gray wool, conservative cut, the kind of outfit meant to be invisible among bankers and office workers. Even his posture was designed to disappear. Shoulders relaxed, hands loosely folded, gaze down at a folded piece of paper that might have been a deposit slip or might have been nothing at all. A customer at Emma's window complained about a check hold. Emma listened, nodded, did what she could. When she glanced up again, the man had moved just a few feet into the line, not the end of it. Not where you went if you were raised right. He joined at a place that made no sense unless he'd been watching the rhythm of the queue and knew exactly when the gap would open. A woman behind him started to protest, then stopped when another customer stepped forward and filled the space between them, dissolving the moment into noise. The line swallowed the mistake, like the bank itself didn't want it remembered. Emma felt a small, inexplicable chill. It wasn't that he'd cut. People cut lines all the time. It was the way the room seemed to cooperate with him, the way the crowd's chaos briefly aligned to make his wrong position look right. He reached Emma's window a minute later than he should have. He placed his paper on the counter with the softness of someone handling something fragile, then slid it back into his pocket as if he'd changed his mind. "Morning," he said, voice calm, polite. "Morning." Emma replied. For the first time, he looked directly at her, nothing aggressive. Nothing flirtatious, just a quick, clinical check, like a man confirming a detail on a list. "I'll just need to make a deposit," he said, and then hesitated, as if choosing his next words carefully. "But not here. I'll wait for the next window." Before Emma could answer, he stepped sideways, away from her, toward the adjacent teller, as if that had been the plan all along. Emma watched him go, watched his back straighten in that controlled, unhurried way. Watched him position himself again, half a step closer to the rope, angled so his shoulder blocked the view of his hands from anyone behind him. Across the lobby, the front doors opened. A man in a work jacket entered, shaking rain off his sleeves, eyes scanning the room with the distracted urgency of someone running late. The man in the gray suit didn't look up, but he shifted his weight, barely, almost lazily, just enough that his reflection in the glass panel beside the door changed, and in that tiny adjustment, Emma felt something click into place that she couldn't name yet. A bank was supposed to be the safest kind of ordinary, That morning, it felt like a stage, and someone had just taken his mark. The man in the work jacket didn't join the line. He hovered near the calendar display by the entrance, those cheap promotional calendars with puppies and tractors, pretending to wipe rain from his hands while his eyes kept flicking. Not to the tellers, but to the people. He was mid-30s, broad-shouldered, hair damp, boots leaving small dark crescents on the tile. If Emma saw him on a normal day, she'd peg him as a contractor stopping in before a job site opened. Except he wasn't acting like someone with a job to get to. He was acting like someone with a clock in his head. Emma tried to keep her face neutral. A teller's expression was supposed to be a soft wall, friendly enough to calm customers, blank enough to invite nothing personal. She watched the gray suit man at the next window without looking like she was watching him. The way you watched a stove burner you didn't trust. He didn't hand over a deposit slip. He placed a small envelope on the counter, thin, unmarked, the kind of thing someone might use for cash. The teller beside Emma, Olivia, glanced up with her practiced smile, said something polite, and the man leaned slightly forward as if to answer. His mouth moved, but his voice didn't carry. Then he did something that didn't belong in a bank. He turned his body a fraction so his shoulder made a clean screen between his hands and the room. Olivia's eyes dropped to the envelope. Her smile tightened, not fear, not panic, just that micro-flinch of someone who's been handed a problem that isn't in the training manual. She slid the envelope back toward him. The gray suit man didn't argue. He didn't react at all. He simply nodded once, like a decision had been confirmed, and pulled the envelope away as smoothly as if the rejection had been expected. Then he stepped back and didn't leave. He drifted sideways, right into the flow of people waiting behind the rope, dissolving himself into the line again as if he'd never broken its rules. Outside, the work jacket man moved from the calendar rack to the brochure stand. Picking up a pamphlet about home equity loans he clearly wasn't reading. His eyes caught the gray suit for half a second. No greeting, no recognition, just a faint lift of the chin, so small it could have been a neck stretch. Emma's stomach went tight. It wasn't the gesture itself. It was the timing, like a relay baton passing without hands touching it. A customer at Emma's window, a retired man in a cap, asked her to break a 50 into smaller bills. Emma did it, fingers moving on instinct. She handed the cash over, nodded, wished him a good day. Her attention never fully left the room. The gray suit man adjusted the strap of his briefcase, except he didn't have a briefcase. He wore no watch, yet he glanced toward the wall clock as if checking it by habit. Then he moved again, not forward, not out, but to a spot near the stanchion where the overhead lights created a thin glare on the polished floor. And in that glare, Emma saw the second thing, a faint line, almost like chalk dust, curving from the toe of his right shoe to the tile, then disappearing when he shifted his weight. Something on the sole, powder, maybe, or residue from a marked surface. It would have meant nothing if Emma hadn't spent half her life watching people track snow and mud into buildings. This wasn't snow or mud. It was too pale, too fine, too deliberate looking. The work jacket man chose that moment to stroll toward the public writing table, the one with chained pens. He didn't sit. He didn't write. He stood at an angle where, in the mirrored glass of the manager's office, he could watch both the door and the line. Emma's pulse began to climb, quiet but persistent, like a hand tightening around her ribs. She told herself to stop, to be normal, to mind her window and her receipts and the small daily dramas of overdrafts and bounced checks. But then Olivia, without turning her head, slid a single note onto Emma's counter under the pretense of straightening a stack of deposit slips. Just 2 words, written in neat block letters. Call Louis. Louis was the branch security officer, not a guard with a gun, an older man who mostly handled locking procedures and the occasional angry customer. Emma stared at the note for 1 beat too long, then tucked it under her cash tray like it was nothing. Across the lobby, the gray suit man made a final, subtle move. He stepped out of line, again, not to the end, not to the exit, but to a precise place beside the holiday donation box, the one filled with toy envelopes for the Salvation Army. He stood there, motionless, eyes lowered, hands still. Then, with a slow casualness that looked like boredom, he reached into his coat pocket, and instead of pulling out money, he pulled out a small strip of paper, no bigger than a receipt, and let it fall into the donation slot like he was giving spare change. A donation. In December. Totally ordinary. Except Emma had just watched him refuse the envelope at the teller window, meaning whatever he'd just dropped wasn't charity. It was placement. And the worst part was how quickly the room repaired itself around it. Customers shuffling, pens scratching, the door chiming again, like the bank's ordinary life was designed to swallow anything strange before anyone could name it. Emma forced her hands to keep moving. She printed a receipt, stamped it, smiled at the next customer, but her eyes kept tracking that donation box, because now there was something inside it that didn't belong, and she had no idea whether noticing that fact had made her safer, or had just put her name on someone else's list. Louis didn't answer on the first call. Emma let the receiver rest against her cheek long enough for anyone watching to think she was confirming a balance, then hung up and tried again, this time dialing slower, her finger pausing on each number like she couldn't quite remember the code. When Louis finally picked up, he didn't say hello. He said her name, quietly, like he'd been expecting it. "Don't look at the box," he murmured. Emma kept her eyes on the customer in front of her, a young mother counting wrinkled bills with an apologetic smile. The mother didn't know anything. The mother was the camouflage. Emma nodded, pretended to listen to a question about check holds, and spoke into the mouthpiece without moving her lips much. "He dropped paper in it," Emma said. "I saw," Louis replied, "and I saw the other one." "The other one?" "The work jacket." Emma's throat went dry. "What do I do?" Louis exhaled once, controlled. "You do your job. You keep them thinking nobody's clocking them. I'm calling corporate security, not the police." "Why not?" "Because police show up loud," Louis said. "And loud is what gets people hurt when nobody knows what they're walking into." The mother slid the last bill across. Emma took it, counted, handed back change. Her hands did it clean. Her mind didn't. She kept seeing the receipt-sized strip vanish into the donation slot like a coin, like a habit, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Behind the stanchion rope, the gray suit man shifted his stance. Subtle as a tide changing, he angled his body toward the front doors now, not like he was leaving, but like he was ready to move when someone else did. The work jacket man had drifted to the far brochure rack, the one near the public phone. He flipped a pamphlet once, twice, never reading a word, watching reflections. Emma's next customer stepped up, a man with a paycheck envelope, ink smudged on his fingers. He slid it across and asked if she could cash it. Emma smiled, her bank smile, while her brain screamed that the envelope was too thin and too clean, and she hated how today had turned every paper rectangle into a threat. As she counted out bills, Olivia's voice floated from the neighboring window, pitched slightly too bright. "Mr. Halvorsen, I didn't see you there." Emma didn't know who Halvorsen was. She knew Olivia didn't greet customers by last name unless she'd met them before. Olivia's tone had the same warmth it used for regulars, except it was weaponized, an announcement disguised as friendliness. The gray suit man's eyes flicked up at the name like it was a word he'd been trained to recognize. Not surprise, confirmation. He didn't correct her. He let the name hang. Then he did something else that was almost nothing. He reached into his pocket and produced a folded deposit slip, blank, and began writing on it with a pen he didn't borrow from the chained pens. His own pen. He wrote without looking down, like he'd memorized what he needed to put on paper. Emma's skin prickled. People with nothing to hide didn't bring their own pen to a bank in 1983 and write like that. Not unless they were accountants or obsessives. And this man was neither. This man moved like he was trying to leave as few fingerprints behind as possible, in every sense. Louis's voice came back in her ear, softer now. "We have a back corridor to the manager's office. I want you to do something for me." Emma's stomach tightened. "Louis, listen," he said. "You know how the line curves on busy days. People naturally drift toward the right-hand window because it's closer to the door. They'll pick a position in line to control who ends up at which teller." Emma glanced at the rope path. It was true. It wasn't written anywhere, but everyone in the branch knew it. If you stood just a little left of the stanchion post, you'd end up with Olivia. If you stood on the right edge, you'd end up with Emma. People did it all the time without thinking. Today, someone was doing it on purpose. Louis continued. If he's smart, he'll try to get to Olivia again, or to you, depending on what he wants. I need to know which. Emma swallowed. How? You don't stop him, Louis said. You nudge the river. When the next customer steps up, you call Olivia for help with something routine. Make her leave her window for 10 seconds. The line will reflow. If the gray suit adjusts his position to compensate, we'll know he's not here for banking. He's here for placement. Emma's fingers tightened around the phone. The idea felt insane, tiny, petty, like office choreography, yet everything about the morning had been built on tiny choices and invisible geometry. Do it clean, Louis warned. No sudden moves, no staring. And Emma, don't touch the donation box. Emma hung up before she could talk herself out of it. She waited until her current customer tucked his money away and stepped aside. Then, with a practiced, ordinary cadence, she looked toward Olivia and lifted her voice like she'd done 100 times. Olivia, can you come look at this check endorsement for a second? I just want to make sure. It was the most boring sentence in the world, and it landed in the room like a trigger. Olivia stepped away, smoothing her skirt, holding her smile. As she moved, the line shifted. People instinctively leaned toward Emma's window now because it was the only active one. The gray suit man moved too, not forward, sideways, 1/2 step, placing himself precisely where the stanchion rope would funnel him to Emma the moment Olivia's window went dark. Emma felt the fog tighten. The line position wasn't a habit for him. It was a steering wheel, and he'd just turned it toward her. The gray suit man reached her window as if he'd always belonged there, as if the half-step sideways hadn't just exposed him. Emma forced her face into the calm geometry of customer service and slid the counter tray forward. Up close, his details sharpened. The suit was good, but not new. The tie was knotted with deliberate indifference, and his hands, clean nails, faint callus on the thumb, looked like they belonged to someone who handled paper more than tools. His eyes didn't land on her name tag the way most people's did. They landed on the security mirror in the corner, then the lobby clock, then the donation box, then back to Emma. He set a thin envelope on the counter. No account, he said. Cash exchange. For what amount? Emma asked, and hated how normal her voice sounded compared to the noise in her head. 1,000? He replied. In mixed bills. Most people asked for 20s. This man said mixed like he was ordering a code. He slid the envelope closer with 2 fingers, not touching the counter longer than necessary. Like contact itself carried risk. Emma opened it and saw a neat stack of hundreds. She counted them once, then again, because her hands needed an excuse to slow down. As she did, he placed the blank deposit slip he'd been writing on, still folded, near the edge of the counter, not pushed to her, not offered, just positioned where a breeze or an elbow might accidentally move it. Emma didn't touch it. Do you need smaller bills? She asked. Yes, he said. And I'd like 10 and 5s, 15 and 1s, and, he paused, as if checking a list that wasn't there. Oh, a roll of quarters, a roll of quarters. In December, in a bank lobby full of Christmas jingles and cranky shoppers. It was the kind of request that sounded harmless until you remembered how many things could be hidden inside anything that came wrapped and sealed. Emma's throat tightened. I'll need to step to the vault for the quarters. His gaze flicked to the side corridor that led behind the teller line. He masked it quickly, but the muscle memory was there. He cared about where she went and how long she'd be out of sight. Of course, he said. Polite, no rush. The words were wrong because the rhythm was wrong. No rush was what you said when you were in control. Emma kept counting, kept her body still. She could feel Olivia's eyes on her from the neighboring window, concern disguised as routine, and she could feel the work jacket man in her periphery. 2. Shifting slightly, angling for a view of her hands, Emma pushed the counted bills back into the envelope and smiled like she'd made a simple mistake. I'm sorry, she said. I'll need to log this exchange with my manager. New policy for cash transactions over 500 without an account. It was a lie, but it was the kind of lie a bank could plausibly have. It was boring. It was bureaucratic. It was a wall that didn't look like a wall. For the first time, something tight moved across the gray suit man's face. Annoyance, not fear. He didn't argue. He didn't push. He recalculated. Fine, he said. Call him. Emma turned her head toward the back corridor and raised her hand as if signaling Lewis. But she didn't move her feet. She didn't leave the window. She didn't give him the satisfaction of watching her disappear behind a door. And that was when he finally did the thing he'd been building toward. He tapped the folded deposit slip once, soft, almost playful, then let his fingertip rest there a fraction too long, like he was marking a spot on a map. Also, he said, lowering his voice just enough to feel intimate. Tell Olivia I appreciate her help today. Emma's pulse jumped. He'd never been introduced to Olivia. He'd never said her name out loud until now. Across the lobby, Olivia's smile faltered for half a second, tiny. Human, then returned, brighter than before, like she was trying to drown the moment in cheer. Emma's fingertips went cold, because now it wasn't just that the man had chosen her line. It was that he'd chosen her branch, and he already knew who belonged to it. Emma didn't look at Olivia again. She kept her eyes on the deposit slip, as if it were just paper, as if her brain hadn't just learned a new kind of fear. Step back for me, please, she said, calm enough to pass for policy. Just while I verify. The gray suit man didn't move right away. He let a full beat pass, long enough to remind her that he could choose not to obey. Then he took one slow half-step back, not to the line, just back from the counter, still close enough that if she made a mistake, he'd be there to capitalize on it. Emma slid the envelope into the cash drawer and closed it. The click sounded too loud. Her hand hovered near the silent alarm pedal beneath the counter, but she didn't press. Not yet. Not with the lobby full. Not with the possibility that this was exactly what he wanted. A disruption that created cover. She leaned slightly toward Olivia's window and said, without turning her head, Olivia, manager call. It was code between tellers. The kind that meant, don't ask. Don't debate. Just do it. Olivia nodded once, too quickly, and stepped away from her station with the practiced ease of someone going to the back office to fetch a form. She didn't run. She didn't show panic. She walked like a woman who had learned, long ago, that moving fast made you memorable. The gray suit man watched her go, and Emma caught the tiniest shift in his posture, an adjustment that wasn't about comfort. It was about timing. Behind him, the work jacket man drifted closer to the brochure rack. He picked up a pamphlet, flipped it once, then held it upside down. He wasn't reading. He was standing in a place that gave him a direct line of sight to Emma's hands and the corridor Olivia had disappeared into. Emma's mind kept grabbing for ordinary explanations and finding none that fit cleanly. Maybe they were running a check fraud ring. Maybe they'd scoped the branch for cash delivery days. Maybe this was just criminals. But criminals didn't memorize names like that. Criminals didn't use the line itself as a tool. Emma swallowed and forced her hands to do something normal. She pulled a transaction log sheet and began writing slowly, as if she were recording the exchange. In reality, she was buying seconds. She was listening. Outside, wind pushed grit across the sidewalk. Inside, the carols continued. The lobby stayed bright and harmless. And yet the air felt different now, like the bank had become a room inside a much larger machine, one she'd never seen until the gears brushed her skin. The gray suit man leaned forward again, voice dropping. Your manager won't like you delaying this. My manager won't like an audit finding missing documentation, Emma said, giving him the blandest sentence she owned. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. You're careful. I'm employed, she replied. His gaze slid down, briefly, to the lower edge of the counter, where her knees were, where the silent alarm pedal would be if he knew it existed. Then he looked back up, and the smile sharpened. You know, he said softly, there are ways to be careful that make people nervous. Emma's pen froze a fraction of an inch above the page. He wasn't threatening her. Not directly. He was steering her. He was pushing her toward a decision that would isolate her. Press the alarm. Make a scene. Become the center of the story. Or don't. And let him keep control. Then the older man near the stanchions, the one with the newspaper, did something strange. He folded his paper not in half like most people, but into a long, narrow strip, then turned it so the sports page faced outward. He didn't look up. He didn't need to. The work jacket man's shoulders relaxed, as if he'd just received a confirmation. Emma's breath caught. A visual signal, not loud, not dramatic, but unmistakably intentional once you saw it. And Emma realized the truth in a single cold flash. She wasn't dealing with one man trying to get money. She was watching a choreography. The line position, the folded slip, Olivia's name, none of it was random. It was a system using ordinary things, cues, paper, small talk, to move something through the world without anyone noticing. Olivia returned, not with their branch manager, but with Henry Caldwell, the assistant manager, moving at a steady pace, face neutral, tie slightly crooked like he'd been interrupted mid-task. Henry stopped behind Emma's station and leaned in. "What's going on?" Emma kept her eyes on the counter. "He wants an exchange. No account." Over policy threshold. Henry's gaze flicked to the gray suit man's face, then to the folded deposit slip, then to the line beyond. He didn't say much. He just straightened slightly and spoke in the calm tone managers use to diffuse complaints. "Sir," Henry said, "we can do this, but you'll need to fill out ID information." The gray suit man's expression didn't change, but his eyes moved, fast, to the lobby clock. He was counting time. Henry waited. Polite, steady. The gray suit man exhaled once and slid his hands into his coat pockets. "Forget it," he said lightly. "I'll come back." And in that moment, Emma understood what the real transaction had been. It wasn't the cash. It was the test. And they had just failed, or passed, in a way she didn't yet understand. Henry didn't move to block him. That would have turned the lobby into a stage. Instead, he did the opposite. He gave the man space, gave him dignity, gave him the exact normal exit a normal customer would take. "Of course," Henry said. "Warm enough to be harmless? Any time." The gray suit man nodded once, already halfway gone, and the work jacket man drifted with him like a shadow that belonged to the same body. The newspaper man folded his strip back into a square, tucked it under his arm, and followed at a slower pace 3 separate departures that looked unconnected to everyone in the bank except the 3 people now standing very still behind the counter. Emma watched the glass doors swallow them and felt the urge to finally breathe, then stopped herself, because breathing too loudly would have admitted she'd been holding her breath at all. Henry leaned closer, voice barely moving the air. "Did he give you anything?" Emma touched the closed drawer with the edge of her knuckle. "Envelope. No return address. No sender." Like he wanted it to disappear into the machine. Henry's eyes flicked to Olivia. Olivia stood rigid, hands clasped, face composed in a way that was almost impressive. Except Emma could see the pulse in her throat, quick and hard, as if her body was arguing with her training. "You did right," Henry said to Emma. Then, to Olivia, "Go to the back. Take a minute." Olivia didn't argue. She walked away too smoothly, the way a person walked when they didn't want anyone to notice they were leaving. The corridor swallowed her, and, for a second, Emma had the sixth sense she was watching someone step off a dock into dark water. Henry reached under the counter, not for the alarm, but for the internal phone. He didn't dial a public number. He punched an extension Emma had never seen used, then waited with his gaze fixed on the bank's front windows as if he expected the glass itself to answer. A click. Henry didn't say hello. He said, it happened again. He listened. His face didn't react, but his eyes did, tightening, sharpening, like a man reading a threat he couldn't show. Emma leaned in just enough to hear the other end as a low murmur, not words, just tone, clipped and controlled. Henry glanced down at the transaction log Emma had started, then at the drawer. "Still here?" he said into the phone. Another pause. "Understood." Henry replied, "No, we won't move it." "Yes, normal operations." He hung up without ceremony, then looked at Emma for the first time, like he was seeing her as more than staff. "Emma," he said softly, "I need you to do exactly what you did just now if he comes back." A cold prickle ran up her arms. "Who is that?" Henry didn't answer the question. He answered the reality behind it. "Someone who cares a lot about patterns," he said, "and someone who doesn't want us to make noise yet." Emma stared at the door, half expecting the gray suit man to be standing there again, smiling. Because of course he would be, because this whole thing felt less like a robbery and more like a rehearsal for something that needed the bank to stay calm. Henry lowered his voice to nearly nothing. "They used the line," he said. "They used you?" And they used Olivia's name like a knife that never touched skin. Emma's throat went dry. "Olivia," Henry held up a hand, not to silence her, to keep her from choosing a wrong word in a room that suddenly felt like it might be listening. "Don't decide what she is," he said. "Not yet." Outside, across the street, a car that had been parked too neatly eased forward a few feet, then stopped again. No horn, no rush, just movement calibrated to be seen by the people who knew to look. Henry's gaze followed it, and his mouth tightened. "They're not done," he murmured, and Emma understood the terrifying part. The bank had stayed open. The carols still played. Customers still stood in line. But the building had quietly changed categories. It wasn't just a branch anymore. It was a checkpoint. Henry didn't announce anything. He didn't lock the doors. He didn't change the music. Didn't tell the guard to hover. Didn't give the lobby a reason to feel watched. He did what people like him always did when something went wrong. He kept the surface smooth so whatever lived beneath it would come back to breathe. By early afternoon, the line thinned, then thickened again with the lunch hour rush. And Emma learned how exhausting normal could be when it was being worn like camouflage. She kept stamping slips, sliding deposit bags into the slot, smiling at retirees who counted pennies like prayers. Every time the bell above the door chimed, her pulse jumped. Then she forced it down. She had to. Panic was information. Olivia returned from the back with her hair reset and her face arranged. Too arranged. She moved with careful economy, as if the floor might shift under her feet if she wasted motion. She avoided Emma's eyes, then made herself look anyway, quick, bright, polite, like a person proving she had nothing to hide. The effort made it worse. A little after 3, the bell chimed again, and Emma knew before she saw him. Not intuition, pattern. The lobby temperature changed in a way it didn't for ordinary customers. People unconsciously making space, shoulders drawing in, the same invisible ripple that followed the gray suit man earlier. He entered alone this time. No work jacket, no newspaper, just him, carrying a thin manila folder like a teacher bringing tests. He paused near the velvet rope and waited, not at the end of the line, at the same precise distance from the counter as before, close enough to see, far enough to appear uncommitted. Emma kept her hand steady. Henry didn't look up immediately. He let the man wait the way you let a difficult customer wait when you're training them to accept your pace. Then Henry lifted his eyes and gave a mild smile, as if seeing him was coincidence. "Back so soon," Henry said. The man's smile appeared and vanished. "I realized I may have made an error." Emma's stomach tightened. He spoke like someone correcting paperwork, not someone correcting a mission. He stepped to Olivia's station as if pulled by gravity. Olivia rose halfway, then sat again, an involuntary stutter in her body that Emma saw, and the man pretended not to. "I'd like to retrieve the envelope," the man said quietly. Olivia's lips parted. No sound came. Her throat worked once like she was swallowing something sharp. Henry moved before she could. Not fast. Fast would have been a confession. He simply arrived beside Olivia with a supervisor's calm and placed one hand on the counter edge, owning the space without crowding it. "I'm afraid we can't," Henry said. Polite, final. Once it's processed, it's processed. "It hasn't been processed," the man replied, still smiling. "Not if you're smart." The word smart hung between them like a wire. Behind the man, a customer coughed, just a cough, but Emma heard it as a cover sound. A small, human noise used the way laughter was used in crowded salons, to mask what mattered. The man leaned closer, voice dropping into a tone meant for only the people who understood that quiet could be louder than shouting. People make mistakes, he said. Eyes on Olivia. They get nervous. They misfile. They drift. Olivia's hands were on the counter, fingers curled hard enough to whiten. She stared at the man's tie knot like it contained instructions. Henry's gaze didn't leave the man's face. If you'd like to file a formal request, I can provide the forms. The man's smile widened, and Emma saw something else underneath it. Impatience. Yes, but also calculation. The measuring of exits and angles. He looked past Henry to Emma for the first time, as if noticing her was an afterthought. His eyes moved down to her name tag. Emma, he read softly. Then he glanced to the side, to the lobby clock, and Emma understood with a jolt. He wasn't here to argue. He was here to synchronize. The bell above the door chimed again. 3 men entered in a stagger, not together. One in a brown coat with snow still melting on the shoulders. One in a baseball cap too low. One in a neat dark jacket. Ordinary shapes, ordinary faces, but each stopped in a different place, like they were taking positions they'd rehearsed without ever rehearsing. The gray suit man didn't turn his head. He didn't have to. Henry's voice stayed even, but his eyes sharpened. Emma, he said without looking at her. Walk to the copier. Start a job. Any job? Emma stood, legs slightly numb, and moved as if obeying a normal request. She felt every gaze in the room without knowing which ones mattered. Behind her, she heard the gray suit man speak again, low enough to be mistaken for courtesy. Mrs. Carter, he said to Olivia, using the wrong last name with perfect intention. Let's not make this ugly. Olivia flinched. That tiny crack was all it took. From the corner of her eye, Emma saw Henry's hand shift under the counter, not to the public alarm, not to the siren that would turn this into a spectacle, but to something smaller, quieter, a button that didn't ring out, a button that called people who didn't need uniforms to move. Emma reached the copier and pressed start on a blank page like it was the most important task in the world. The machine whirred, loud in the hush, spitting out useless paper that looked like proof of normal business. Then everything happened without the kind of violence movies promised. The brown coat man drifted toward the door as if to leave, then paused beside the brochure rack. The baseball cap man moved one step closer to the rope line, then stopped, eyes flicking once toward the teller windows. The neat dark jacket man stood near the writing desk, hands empty, posture patient, a choreography of waiting. The gray suit man watched Henry, still smiling. You're protecting her, he said. That's sentimental. Henry didn't blink. I'm protecting my institution. The gray suit man leaned back slightly, as if conceding, and for the first time his smile thinned into something colder. Then you understand, he said. Outside, the parked car across the street rolled forward again. Just a few feet, a signal for anyone trained to read small movements. Henry's voice stayed calm. I do. And then, behind the glass of the front door, a man in a plain coat appeared. No badge flashed. No command barked, just a presence stepping into the frame as if he'd been there all along. Another one moved along the sidewalk. Another crossed at the corner without hurrying. The street filled with ordinary pedestrians who weren't pedestrians. The gray suit man's eyes flicked once, barely, to the reflections in the bank window, and Emma watched his calculation update in real time. He hadn't come to retrieve an envelope. He'd come to see if the bank had already been turned. Henry's quiet button had answered that question. The gray suit man's smile returned, but it no longer reached his eyes. All right, he said lightly, as if concluding a customer service call. Then we'll do this another way. He took a step back from the counter, and Olivia, finally, looked at Henry, not with fear, not with guilt, but with something that looked like relief collapsing into grief, because she understood what his presence meant. Not rescue, exposure. The gray suit man turned as if leaving. The 3 staggered men turned with him, each one moving a fraction too early, a fraction too coordinated. And that fraction was enough. The front door opened. The plaincoat man entered at the same moment. Another plaincoat man entered from the side corridor, and a third appeared near the writing desk as if he'd risen from the floorboards. They didn't shout. They didn't point guns. They simply occupied space with authority that didn't need volume. The gray suit man stopped, for half a second. The bank was perfectly still, carols in the background, copier paper settling, a child somewhere asking for a lollipop. Then the gray suit man did the only thing left to someone who realized the board had flipped. He spoke, not to Henry, not to Olivia, but to the room, as if trying to make this look like anything else. "This is a misunderstanding," he began. A plaincoat man replied, voice gentle, almost bored. "We'll sort it out." Emma watched the brown coat man's hand twitch toward his pocket, then stop when he realized he was already boxed in by angles he hadn't noticed. The gray suit man's eyes moved once more, toward Olivia. Not anger, a promise. Henry stepped closer to Olivia, not touching her, but blocking that line of sight with his shoulder. And just like that, the entire operation, the line position, the name probe, the staggered entry, the slow car across the street, collapsed into a quiet containment that looked, to everyone else in the bank, like nothing more dramatic than a few men asking someone to come outside. The gray suit man walked out between them without resistance, because resistance would have been loud. The three staggered men followed in different directions, each intercepted by a different plain coat. The door closed. The lobby resumed breathing. Emma's hands shook so badly she had to clasp them together under the counter. Henry didn't look triumphant. He looked older. Olivia sat down slowly, as if her bones had been replaced with sand. Her eyes shone, but she didn't cry. Crying was what you did when the worst thing had already happened. This, whatever this was, still had teeth. A few minutes later, the internal phone rang. Henry answered without saying hello. He listened. He nodded once. He hung up and turned to Emma. "You did good," he said. Emma swallowed. "Is it over?" Henry stared at the front door like he could still see the gray suit man's smile floating in the glass. "It's contained," he said carefully. "For now." Olivia finally spoke, voice thin. "What happens to me?" Henry didn't answer her, not because he didn't care, because answers were dangerous. Instead, he slid a blank withdrawal slip toward her and placed a pen beside it. "Write nothing," he said softly. "Just hold the pen." It sounded absurd. It sounded like theater. But Emma understood. Even in a bank, even in daylight, the Cold War didn't end with handcuffs. It ended with habits changing. It ended with people learning that the safest thing they could do was look ordinary while the world quietly rearranged itself around them. When Emma left work that evening, she noticed the line outside the bank was gone. The street looked the same. The air smelled like exhaust in winter and somebody's roasted nuts cart. Nothing had exploded. No sirens. No headlines. But as she crossed to her car, she saw a single scrap of newspaper tucked under her windshield wiper, blank except for one clean crease, folded exactly the way the newspaper man had folded his strip earlier. A mark, not a message. And she understood, with a hollow clarity, that the war didn't always punish you with blood. Sometimes it punished you with awareness, because once you'd seen the pattern, you never stopped looking for it.